Now let's talk about the bad effects of light, because light is not supposed to arrive in our system at any time. And nowadays, because of screens and artificial light, we have access to light at times of day and night that normally we wouldn't. Now, earlier I said that you need a lot of light, in particular sunlight, to set these clock mechanisms. That's true, but there's a kind of diabolical feature to the way all this works, which is the longer you've been awake, the more sensitive your retina and these cells are to light. So that if you've been awake for 10, 12, 14 hours, it becomes very easy for even a small amount of light coming from a screen or from an overhead light to trigger the activation of the clock and make you feel like you want to stay up later, make it harder to fall asleep, and disrupt your sleep pattern. Okay, so the simple way to think about this is you want as much light as is safely possible early in the day, morning and throughout the day, including blue light, and you want as little light coming into your eyes, artificial or sunlight, after, say, 8 p.m. And certainly you do not want to get bright light exposure to your eyes between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. And here's why. Light that arrives to the eyes between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. approximately suppresses the release of dopamine, this neuromodulator that makes us feel good, is sort of an endogenous antidepressant, and can inhibit learning and create all sorts of other detrimental effects. It does this through a mechanism, for those of you who want to know the neural pathways, that involves light to the eyes that's then signaled to a structure called the habenula. When that habenula gets activated, it's actually called the disappointment nucleus, because it actually makes us feel less happy and more disappointed and can lead to certain forms of depression in the wakeful state. Now, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you need to use the bathroom, or you're on an all-night flight and you need to read or whatever it is, fine. It's, every once in a while, it's not going to be a problem to get bright light exposure to your eyes in the middle of the night. But if you think about our lifestyle nowadays and being up late looking at phones, even if you dim that screen, you're triggering this activation, because your retinal sensitivity and the sensitivity of these neurons has gone up late in the day. For those of you that are experiencing challenges with mood, those of you that have anxiety, learning problems, issues focusing, the questions I usually get are, how can I focus better? One of the best ways you can support your mechanisms for good mood, mental health, learning, focus, metabolism, etc., is to take control of this light exposure behavior at night and not get much or any bright light exposure in the middle of the night. These cells in our eye, these neurons that signal the central clock, reside mostly, not exclusively, but mostly in the bottom half of our retina. And because we have a lens in front of our retina, and because of the optics of lenses, that means that these cells are actually viewing our upper visual field. This is probably not coincidental that these cells were essentially designed to detect sunlight, which is overhead, of course. So if you want to avoid improper activation of these neurons, it's better to place lights that you use in the evening low in your physical environment, so on desktops or even the floor, if you want to go that way, as opposed to overhead lights. So overhead fluorescent lights would be the worst. That would be the worst case scenario. Lights that are overhead that are a little bit softer, of the sort of yellow or reddish tints, would be slightly better. But dim lights that are set low in the room are going to be best, because they aren't going to activate these neurons and therefore shift your circadian clock. But let's talk about what light can do in terms of shifting us in healthy ways. So the way to think about this whole system, again, is you've got adenosine building up depending on how long you've been awake, and it's making you sleepy. And then you've got the circadian mechanisms that are timing your wakefulness and timing when you want to be asleep, mainly through cortisol and melatonin. But there are a bunch of other things that are downstream of cortisol and melatonin. Like, we tend to be hungrier during our wakeful period than late at night. Some people like to eat it late at night, but if you're finding that you can't become a day person or a morning person, shifting your light exposure, exercise, and food intake to the daytime will help. Jamie Zeitzer and colleagues did a beautiful study showing that if you turn on the lights before waking up, so around 45 minutes to an hour before waking up, even if your eyelids are closed, provided you're not under the covers, after doing that for a few days, that increases your total sleep time and shifts forward the time at which you feel sleepy. It makes you want to go to bed earlier each night. Now, in a kind of diabolical way, they did this with teenagers who are notorious for wanting to wake up late and stay up late. And what they found was bright light flashes, just turning on the lights in their environment, overhead lights, because they're trying to activate the system, and that's why they're using overhead lights, even through the eyelids, before these kids woke up, then made those kids naturally want to go to bed earlier, and they ended up sleeping longer. So that's something you could try. You could put your lights on a timer to go on early in the day before you wake up. You could open your blinds so that sunlight is coming through. Now, again, if you curl up under the covers, then it's not going to reach these neurons. But it's remarkable the light can actually penetrate the eyelids, activate these neurons, and go to the central clock. That study illustrates a really important principle of how you're built, which is you have the capacity for what are called phase advances and phase delays. And I don't want to complicate this too much. So the simplest way to think about phase advances and phase delays is that if you see light late in the day, and in particular in the middle of the night, your brain and body, for reasons that now you understand, will think that that's morning light, even though it's not sunlight, because you have this heightened sensitivity. And it will phase delay. It will delay your clock. It will essentially make you want to get up later and go to sleep later. So the simple way to think about this is if you're having trouble waking up early and feeling alert early in the day, you're going to want to try and get bright light exposure even before waking up, because it will advance your clock. It's sort of like turning the clock forward. Whereas if you are having trouble waking up early, you definitely don't want to get too much light exposure or any light exposure to your eyes late in the evening and in the middle of the night, because it's just going to delay your clock more and more. And what you're trying to do is provide them anchors. You're trying to provide them consistent, powerful anchors so that your cortisol, your melatonin, and then everything that cascades down from that, like your metabolism and your ability to learn and your sense of alertness, your dopamine, your serotonin, all that stuff is timed regularly. One of the reasons why there's so much, challenge out there with focus and anxiety and depression, there are a lot of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that people's internal mechanisms aren't anchored to anything regular. These systems, again, will average, but if you can provide them consistent light anchors early in the day and in the evening and avoiding light at night, you will be amazed at the tremendous number of positive effects that can come from that at the level of metabolic factors, hormones, and just general feelings of well-being.